Welcome in, everyone. This is the How It All Works podcast. I'm your host, Phil Scalf. The How It All Works podcast, we are a podcast with a purpose. Our goal is to bring foundational information on major industries that affect our daily lives by sitting down with people who work in those industries. We will discuss career paths, effects on the industry, personal experience, and tie-in jobs. Since we are discussing one industry at a time, we will be using a TV-type format and going season by season. Each season will be anywhere from 4 to 12 episodes in length, with a season finale that brings back our cast of guests to share their experiences together. That brings me to our first season announcement. We will be covering the topic of emergency medicine. This first season, we will be taking a deep dive into the industry that helps us all. We will have a 911 dispatcher, a paramedic, a charge nurse, an ER nurse, and an ER doctor, and a firefighter. Before we dive into our episode today, I want to give a quick shout out to our producer Trent Denson and the wonderful studio he has provided here at Spread the Positive, bringing light to what's going right. Thank you, Trent, for all your hard work in making this possible. Time to introduce our guest. Our guest today is a paramedic with Rutherford County EMS. He has been there for 12 years, and he has over 10,000 calls under his belt. He fills the roles of paramedic supervisor, paramedic, and EMS chaplain. Thank you for coming to join us today, Zach Scalf. All right, thanks for coming in. Thank you for joining us, Zach. So we're just going to dive right into things. This is our first time doing this, so it's okay to be a little flexible. But we're going to start from the very beginning. So you've been a paramedic here in Rutherford County for about, 10, 15 years almost?
It's been 12 years. I started with the county in 2012, so I think the end of this year will be 12 years on the dot.
And that's all you've done for the last 12 years is
pretty much
ride the trucks.
I've worked at a couple other services. I did private for a while. And at the beginning of 2022, I actually worked 2 full-time jobs, one here and one at Williamson. And so most of it's been here though.
What's the differences there between Rutherford County and Williamson?
Oh man.
Without getting you in trouble.
No. They're both good services. They're both very, very different though. Williamson, I think when I went over there, they used to say that they're like one of the highest grossing per capita counties in the country. And so their monetary funds are just enormous. To put it into perspective, they have so much money to spend on their ambulances that they actually put so much equipment and so many gadgets on their ambulances that they were too heavy for state regulations, and they had to start pulling stuff off.
Oh, wow.
So they just have so much money, so much resources. They're very into education, and Rutherford doesn't have that advantage, so it's much more focused on like growth and development as far as in your skills. It's much more of a family, like less professional environment, not in necessarily a bad way. It's just wildly different. Williamson wasn't for me, mostly just because I was so used to Rutherford. It's what I've known.
I understand that. You get comfortable with something, that's where you want to be.
Absolutely.
So, going all the way back to the beginning, what was it, other than needing a job, as most people do, what was it that made you want to get into being a paramedic and doing this? So, you start off as an EMT, right?
Yes. So you start off as an EMT. So things have changed a little bit from when I started as far as in like the credentials needed. But essentially, just to answer your baseline question, so I've given this a lot of thought. I've had a ton of people ask me this over the years, and it's not a super simple answer. I think for some people, it's as simple as I really like helping people and I'm medically inclined, so they get into it. For me, and I know for a lot of people I work with, there's an aspect to it of that adrenaline rush. Like it's very much, a high stakes profession. Everything is different every day. Like some things are the same, obviously, but you never really know what you're getting into. You might come in and run 10 ho-hum-drum calls and just take Granny to the hospital because she tripped and fell. And you might work like a rollover MVA on the interstate with 5 or 6, critically injured people and really have to show up. And that to me is pretty exciting. And if I'm being completely honest with you, when I was about a 22, 23-year-old guy and people asked me what I did, and I said, I'm a courier, that didn't sound as cool as saying I'm a paramedic. And so there was definitely a part of it to that as far as why I got into it.
I get that. The job title does mean something.
Yeah.
But and that kind of leads into kind of some more that you've had kind of an interesting career with Rutherford County. So my understanding, so you're now you're helping with supervision, right? So you're filling a small supervisor role,
Yeah.
and then on top of that, you're also the EMS chaplain.
Yeah.
So what as the EMS chaplain, what's that like? What is that? Is there really any difference between that and your daily job as a paramedic?
Yeah. So people listening, don't get the wrong idea. You think chaplain, like when I think chaplain, there's two very specific chaplains you think of. You think of the guys who go to like divinity school and get like their master's and doctorate in the profession, and then they do it professionally for like hospitals and services, businesses, whatever. That's not me. The second type is a old retired pastor who doesn't really have much else to do, and so he goes and hangs out at the fire departments and gets to know the guys and just provides them with chaplaincy type services. Goes to calls, like at the fire department when they have fires, goes and helps the families out, stuff like that. That is also not me. I went to like the fireside type training for chaplaincy. I did that in 2020, I believe, right in the middle of COVID. Me and a buddy of mine from the fire service here in Rutherford County went over to Knoxville and did it with their guy. And our goal in it was to try to give our people that work for us a chaplain trained person who is on their same level and does their same job. And so it's very, very different. We just wanted to be able to kind of mentor and help the people that work with us a little bit better is kind of why we did it. And that's kind of the focus. And I've actually transitioned. I'm still a chaplain. I still have my credentials, but I'm actually in the middle of building a more universal type peer support program in the service right now.
Okay. So that's kind of letting everybody come together and kind of counsel each other and help each other out when you get one of those, nasty calls that comes in.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. That's awesome. So, with that being said, you've been there for, you said 12 years.
Hang on, let's back up. What was the other part of your first question? That question you just asked? We got off on the chaplaincy stuff. I could talk about it for hours.
I already forgot. My brain.
Something about, my other roles at work.
The supervisor role.
So every service is a little bit different. At Rutherford County, we just created a Paramedic 3 spot, and it's essentially for our FTOs and alternate supervisors. So we have 3
What is FTO?
Field training officer. So we have 3 supervisors per shift, and sometimes they get sick and they take vacation. And it's not really a spot that can be filled by anybody, and it's not really a spot that we can leave empty. So our field training officers have kind of, over the past few years, we've started filling in those spots. And so that's part of what I do. Field training is just exactly what it sounds like. When we get a new hire, they come ride with one of us for a few shifts, and we make sure they're up to scratch, teach them how to do things the Rutherford County way, and then release them. And then we kind of mentor them through their first 6 months or so at work.
Okay. What does that mentorship look like? Is that, meeting a couple times a week?
It's usually just conversations over the phone, or if we see you at work, just pulling you aside, asking you how things are going. There's some QA process involved where, sometimes you're asked to check up on their run tickets and make sure they're okay. It probably looks a little bit different for every FTO, but that's how I do it.
Okay. And as far as, especially with getting people adjusted, it's a tough job to adjust to. Is there any sort of mental health or counseling or anything like that the county does for specifically the new guys coming in, or girls?
Not specifically for the new guys. It's mostly just done by the older paramedics at the service. It's kind of our jobs to make sure people feel welcome, people feel integrated and comfortable to ask for help, because there's definitely this feeling in emergency medicine, like if you don't know something, you should know it.
Yeah.
And it's really hard, especially when you're new someplace, to go and ask for help. And there's also a fear of like retribution as far as from admin. I had this call the other day and I didn't really know exactly what to do. I wasn't sure what the protocol was, or I didn't understand the protocol. It's really hard to go ask for help, especially if the call had a bad outcome or something like that. And so building an environment where those types of questions are okay to ask is tough. And it's definitely an ongoing process.
Yeah, I get that. So we started at the beginning with what you did or what made you kind of want to become a paramedic and EMT and all that. What were some of those first steps you took to start heading that direction?
Yeah. So if someone's listening, what would they do? If
Yeah,
they
like
don't know anything about emergency
wanted,
medicine and they want to go
exactly.
So go to Rutherford County. The
Free recruiting pitch, by the way.
Go to Rutherford County, 611 East Lytle Street, and go talk to someone in that building and tell them you want a job. No, I'm just kidding. So you can do a couple things. I would say if someone came to me and they're saying, Zach, how do I know? Number one, I want to be an EMS because it sounds interesting, but I'm not sure. And then how do I do it? So the first step I would say is figuring out whether or not it is for you, because it is a weird job. It's not just hard; it's strange. Then we can talk after I answer that question. We can talk about kind of what steps you would take. So to figure out how or if you are interested in it, I would say find a paramedic somewhere. Almost everybody knows someone that knows a paramedic somewhere. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't know them personally, track them down, offer to buy them lunch or something, and sit down with them and just talk to them. That should give you a pretty good idea of whether or not you want to do it. And then if you're still kind of have questions about whether or not you would like to do it after that conversation, I would say try to go do a ride along. If you live here in Rutherford County, you can call up to the main office at the county and ask to do a ride along, and they should be able to point you in the right direction. We do have civilian riders all the time come in and ask. You just have to sign a waiver. It's a waiver for like confidentiality for patients. And like a safety thing, like if you do something you're not supposed to do and you die, it's not our fault, those kind of things. So you can do that and go do a ride along and maybe a couple ride alongs, because again, EMS is such a strange, inconsistent job. You may not get a good feel for it till after a few rides. So do those things, figure out if you like it. And then after you do that, you can apply to EMT school. So EMT and paramedic license are just that. They're licenses. They're not degrees. You can pair them with degrees at some places. I know Columbia, you can go to Columbia State's paramedic program and take a couple classes through the community college there and graduate with like a associate's degree in whatever focus you choose outside of your paramedic license. So, but the first step you have to do now, so there's 3 levels. There's EMT basic, there's advanced EMT, and then there's paramedic. And then if you keep going, there's critical care paramedic as well. And those are kind of the 4 levels of licensure that pre-hospital providers perform at, excepting air medical. Air medical has a whole other list of things. They'll hire respiratory therapists, nurses, even doctors sometimes will fly.
Oh, wow.
But that's probably a little rarer, and the only reason we see that here is because of Vanderbilt, I think. Every once in a while, they'll have a doctor on a helicopter. But anyway, so to do EMT school, it's just depending on the program you go to, usually it's just a few months. Some places have accelerated programs that are just a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. If you don't have any medical background, I would not recommend. I'd recommend going to a place around here like Motlow, Columbia, MTSU. Mm-hmm. I can't remember if All State still has a program, but they used to.
You went to MTSU, right?
I went to MTSU for EMT school. When I went, it was EMT IV. That was the advanced EMT of the day back then. And then I went to paramedic school at Columbia State. Okay. And critical care I did through the hospital here, St. Thomas.
So moving through all that, trying to think of the way to put this. So you guys see a lot every day. Mm-hmm. And those who go on ride-alongs get to see a lot. They also might be the younger brother of a paramedic, and they might get pranked while they're at the station.
It's possible.
It's quite possible.
Mm-hmm. It has happened in the past. I know for a fact.
So
Who did you ride with?
I can't remember the guy's name. I remember he had long, dark hair. That's all I can remember.
Man, was it? I cannot remember who you rode with.
Kind of skinny.
I can't remember.
We had a good time. Yeah, I think they had much more better time than I did.
I do remember. I can't remember who it was, but they sure had a lot to say about you.
I don't know.
It was all good.
I hope so.
It was all good.
If not, I'll have them on and we'll talk about it.
I remember very specifically for months after you did that, people coming up to me and asking me if you were going to come work for us.
Unfortunately, didn't really work out.
I just told them you weren't smart enough to pass EMT school.
I was not. I don't think I am. So what's something, you guys onboard new folks all the time because we know stuff like this has a high turnover rate. So what's something you see in somebody where you're like, I don't know if that one's going to stay a while, or flip side, you're like, hey, they may not be here in Rutherford County for the next 10 years, but I don't think they're going anywhere.
It's a really good question. So I would say, as far as the negative signs, it's probably pretty universal to other businesses and other areas, professional areas. If you come in and you're lazy and you complain, you're not going to last. This job in particular is something you have to be hardworking and you have to be into it to stay. If you're not into EMS, if it doesn't interest you, if the medical aspect of it, the trauma aspect of it, just the critical thinking, whatever it is that draws you to it, if it doesn't fascinate you, particularly when you're new, you're not going to last very long, because it's such a difficult job that we do for extraordinarily mediocre pay that it's just, those type of people aren't going to last. More so the people who are complaining, that have character flaws that are pretty evident, more so than the people who aren't interested. But I would say those would be signs of, I know someone's not going to stay for very long. And then people who we get students all the time. Rutherford County has a ton of students riding. We take students from all the major schools around here, and we have a ton of busy ambulances, so they love to send their people to us. And you can just tell when someone comes in that, like, they've got the bug, like they've just got the EMS bug. They're into it. They love it. They're always asking questions. They're always digging. Most of them are pretty nervous because they have a healthy respect for their profession. And that's something that when I see that, I want to encourage them to be confident, but I also appreciate them being nervous, because it is a kind of it's a reverential space. You have people's lives that are counting on you, and they're counting on you from like the first moment you go to school. Like, pay attention during the diabetes lecture or else you might kill somebody. Pay attention during the trauma lecture and deciding on how to triage patients, because you might kill somebody one day, or, hopefully save their life. So there's definitely some nerves there, and I appreciate that when I see new people coming in. And then there's, the typical things, they're hardworking, they're positive, they don't complain. Those types of things that would apply to any other place, I think.
So to kind of pull a little more out of that question, what's something you see in specifically paramedics that you would say, hey, this guy is top 10? He's, you've got your crowd of good medics. Now, what's something that you would say would take, those top 5 guys and pull, or girls even, and pull them out from there and just say, hey, these, if I was, if I was working a mass CAS event, these are the guys I'm grabbing to go with me.
Oh man. So this is a conversation I have all the time. I remember when I was pretty young in EMS, I remember sitting down and writing down every paramedic that worked for us, their names, and trying to rank them and see like who was better, who was worse, and where I ranked among them. And that is kind of embarrassing for me to admit. So if anyone that knows me is listening to this, just know that that's true, because my face is a little red right now. It's hard to say, because when you
stick around for the season finale, we might reveal the list.
That is a great teaser. Oh man, if I could find that, I so would. It definitely changes though. So my list that I wrote 10 years ago is definitely a lot different from what it is now.
We got to shout out the real ones.
Yeah, maybe I could do another one. I could do another list. It's definitely changed since I first wrote it. So getting back to your question, I cannot remember where I read this, but some time in my studies as a paramedic, I remember reading about how to look at your service and separate the wheat from the chaff. And essentially part of what they were saying was about 80% of your workforce, the difference in them is pretty minimal. And then you have the bottom 10 and you have the top 10, and how to discern between who's who and how to help each group. And I think that probably applies to a lot of places, but it may be kind of specific to EMS. Again, I wish I could remember the study. I would give it a shout out, but I think when I look at it, it's just an experience thing for me. I've been on calls before where my foot has hit the doormat walking into somebody's house, or I've stepped a foot out of the ambulance on a bad call and looked around a scene and thought, I don't know what to do. And I've looked over to the side and I've seen a medic just absolutely bawling out, doing everything exactly right. They're already 10 steps ahead and they're ready to go. So I think some of that is just like confidence and decisiveness, which I had a conversation about this with my boss not too long ago. Being a decisive person is not my natural posture. So it's something that I either have to manufacture or I've worked on over the years. And I'm getting better, and a lot of that just comes from experience. I see something that would shock somebody, but I've already seen that 5 or 6 times throughout my career, so I know what to do now. And some of it is just natural personality, force of will, whatever you want to call it. So the medics that have that, I think, would fit into that top, just being able to just be decisive, apply their knowledge in an instant, and then also to be able to think ahead, because it's not just a one step at a time thing. A lot of times you show up on a scene and there's 10 things going on at once. They've all got to be done. They've all got to be done right and in order moving forward to get this patient to the hospital. And then, man, I'm just stuck on that list. I really want to do it again. I want to do that.
Well, let's get away from the list for now. So, obviously we've talked about some character traits and things like that. So we're going to get to you personally a little bit. So we're going to really dive deep into your psychology.
Here we go, everybody.
Just kidding. I don't want to do that to the people of Murfreesboro.
Yeah, I think the paint might melt here.
Yeah, no, this is nice quality paint. But what I would like to talk to you about is, you talk about these calls. What's a call for you that you've been on, and obviously don't use names or anything like that. What's something you went on and where you're like, that call, that was me at my absolute best.
So, spoiler alert, everybody, I've already heard all these questions once. So this is not just answers off the top of my head for the most part. We did practice. But this is one question that I don't know if there's like a specific call where I can look back and say, okay, that's my moment of clarity where I was like, okay, I'm good at this job. Maybe that means I'm not good at it. I hope not. But for me, there was a point, and it really only started happening a few years ago, where I noticed I was showing up on scenes, fairly chaotic scenes, and just by walking in the door, people started calming down. And when I say people, I mean the first responders that are there. Because for those of you that aren't familiar, typically, especially in my area where I work downtown Murfreesboro, we're usually the last people there, because the zone I cover on ambulance has 2 ambulances and probably has 5 fire trucks that cover that same area. So they're usually a lot closer. And then, a dozen cops that cover those same areas. So we're almost always the last person there. And while they have, especially the firefighters, they have good first responder training, it's not their bread and butter necessarily. And so it's just a little bit out of their comfort range. And most guys, and this is not a bash on firemen, Phil knows that
we'll do that later.
We'll do that later off record. The fire guys that work at the fire hall work there because they want to fight fire and they want to do that job. And so they do the EMS side legitimately just to help people, because they're in a position to help people for the most part. And there's some really great medics there and EMTs that know exactly what they're doing. But what they're waiting for when they get there is they're waiting for me. And so when I got to the point in my career where I walked into a house and I could see that it was a serious patient and everyone's kind of uptight, maybe some people are panicking, and as soon as they see me, I see them calm down. That was the moment for me when I started seeing that on a consistent basis. I was like, okay, I'm doing something right, because these guys know me. They've seen me work before, and they're happy that I'm here. So I might be doing something right. That was kind of it for me, and it's a really good feeling.
Yeah, that's probably the best type of feedback you can get.
Yeah, for sure. And there's also you work with older, more seasoned medics you respect, and they don't give you hell after a call about stuff you messed up. Like, that's also a pretty good feeling. You get in the truck leaving the hospital and some crusty old medic doesn't go, man, sure took you long enough, or, I wonder how long it was going to take you to figure out you were supposed to put that patient on CPAP. I was just sitting over there waiting for you, like just stuff like that.
Yeah, and they always let you figure it out too. They never.
A lot of them will, yeah, yeah.
So, How are the interactions, and obviously this is different for every service across the board. So the interactions between Rutherford County EMS, Murfreesboro Fire, Rutherford County Fire, the Sheriff's Department, the Police Department, because you've got Smyrna, Laverne, MPD, plus Rutherford County Sheriffs. How do those interactions work with all these inter-service?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So here, for the most part, especially between the crews that have their boots on the ground, we get along really, really well. We work together really well. There's outliers everywhere. There's days where me and such firefighter, me and such cop butt heads. And that's okay. But for the most part, it is really, really good. Our administrations have had their issues in the past, and with good reason from both sides, I'm sure. I'm not in those meetings. I don't know how they go. So I'm sure that when a few years ago, when Murfreesboro Fire and Rutherford County EMS, we had a big, huge debacle, and our admin turned over. So our director and a couple of his closest assistants left. And I still don't know if they left willingly or if they were given the choice to be fired or to retire. But so those things do happen. But for the most part, I mean, man, the guys up at the headquarters for Ladder 1 on Vine Street that I run most of my calls with, we get along great. They're great guys. Laverne Fire Department is amazing. They do great first responder stuff. Smyrna's coming along. I mean, they don't do any first responding type stuff kind of willingly. We kind of have to ask for them to come. But those guys they're good firemen. They do what they're asked to do by their administration. The county fire guys and us, I mean, we work for the same governing body. Now they have their own chief and captains, and we have ours. But we have, I think, 5 new stations now where we're all in there together. And I just worked at the new Walter Hill station the other day, and it was great, man. Went in there with all the firemen hanging out. It was fine. They left me alone because they know I'm kind of grouchy. I was on the back half of 48, so they just left me alone.
Are you becoming one of those crusty paramedics?
Probably.
That's okay. We'll love you through it.
Yeah.
So outside of like your direct administration, who are you looking for the most for support? Like when you're heading to a call, obviously, you might be the supervisor, or you might have a supervisor en route. Outside of those people directly above you, who are you looking to help make that call go better? That's outside of like ROCO EMS.
So probably just the other first responders. I mean, the police and the fire. This is something that people don't really think about, but just think about the logistics of taking a 200-pound person down 2 flights of steps and out to the ambulance that's unresponsive and like covered in vomit. Just take 2 seconds and think about that. If you don't have guys that are there and ready to work with you and help you and present their own ideas on how to do that kind of stuff, it's just not going to happen well. You're all going to fall down the stairs together and just end up in a heap at the bottom of the steps. And so for me, I think that's usually the people I rely on the most. Think about a car wreck. It is so tough to get someone who's critically hurt or injured that's pinned in a car out without hurting them or hurting them worse than they already are. And the way these guys just get in there and get it taken care of really is just fantastic. So those are the people outside of Rutherford County EMS that I rely on the most. Is just, and I do. People that know me, man, I give them a hard time. I really do all the time. Mom and Dad have heard me make so many jokes about firemen, and you know what? They give it right back. They give as good as they get. So
good.
But I really count on those guys a lot. They're good at their job, and hopefully they can rely on me too.
So I'm not going to get into my own story, but I do have firsthand experience of someone covered in vomit that weighs over 200 pounds being unresponsive. And I was trying to get them up the stairs so we could get them to bed.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother story.
Well,
for 5 years in the Marine Corps, you'll experience
I look
that
forward to hearing it. Yeah, I kind of figured that's what that was from.
Oh, yeah. It was a great time.
Yeah, it's tough.
From what I remember from that night, it was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So going forward a little bit, so we've talked about kind of the front end of the call, that patient interaction, that interaction with other EMS. On the backside, when you get them to the hospital, or actually while you're transporting them, kind of what's going through the transport, who are you guys talking to while you're transporting? And then when you get them to the hospital, also, there's multiple hospitals within driving distance of here. Mm-hmm. How do you guys make that determination of which hospital to take them to? and all that. What kind of plays into those decisions?
So let's break that up a little bit. Let's take the hospital decision out of it real quick, because that's a complicated thing. So let's just talk about who you're using and who you're talking to in the back of the ambulance on the way to the hospital. So one of the coolest / scariest things about EMS is the back of that ambulance is a freaking island. You are by yourself. You have no help close by 9 times out of 10. You are on your own for however long. Especially, guys, if anyone's listening to this that works in rural EMS, props, because you are on your own. You've got your bag of drugs, you've got your protocols, and you've got your, who's going to blink first. So it is a cool feeling. I still can remember my first call as a paramedic by myself with an EMT. So it's just me. I had my EMT start a line for me, put him on the monitor. I'm sitting back there, reading my protocol book, trying to figure out what's going on. And he closed the door and gets out, and I look up and I realize I'm back here all by myself, and it's just you. So you're kind of by yourself, but you do have a radio on your hip. You got your protocol book in the bench seat, and you've got a cell phone in your pocket. And so the people typically, if I need help now, let's say a patient codes on me on the way to the hospital, typically we will stop and ask for help, or, depending on how far away you are from the hospital, just continue doing what you're supposed to be doing. Coding. Yeah. When someone dies, they lose a heartbeat, stop breathing. So the radio, the phone, I will call the hospital pretty regularly and ask for orders from a doctor. And I'll call the hospital, and St. Thomas Rutherford, bless them, they've got the residents in the ER, and some of them are fantastic and amazing, and some of them are brand new and are still getting their feet wet. And when you call back to the doc box, you don't know who you're going to get. So I'll always call and say, hey, this is Zach, Medic 15. I need to speak to an attending. I don't say doctor. I say I need to speak to an attending. That way I know I'm because if I'm calling in, it's usually because somebody's dying and I need help. Yeah. Or I don't know what's going on. So we can call in for orders. They can give us orders for procedures and dosages of medicines that aren't in our protocol, but still fall within our scope. So I can't call a doctor and be like, hey, doc, I need to amputate this limb. That's outside of my scope of practice. But I can call in and say, hey, I've tried this much of my medicine. That's the limit to my protocol, but it's starting to work. I think I just need a little bit more. And he can say, yeah, you're good. Give him a little bit more. Or, just using a medicine not for several of our medicines have multiple uses, just maybe not in our protocol, but the medicine is in my scope of practice. So I can use it with a doctor's orders. So that's who I have in the back of the ambulance with me. And you've always got your EMT up front. You can holler, help, which I've done before.
I have no doubt. Mm-hmm. I do remember the ride along I went with the paramedic I was riding with. We show up to a house, and the lady, I will never forget this, because it was the first time in my life I realized that people will use EMS as a transport service. Mm-hmm. She was a little overweight, but there were two things I noticed right off. First thing, she was wearing hospital socks, and the second thing, the
sticky, grippy socks.
Yeah, I might need a grippy sock vacation soon. We'll see. The way these kids keep me up at night.
You don't want one, man.
We'll see. I hear they give you some really great drugs.
Yeah, they'll give you those paper scrubs to wear too, man.
Oh, that's great. Even better. Yeah. I'll go outside in the rain. But that was the first thing that I noticed. And the second thing, I looked over, and the grandkids were sitting on the couch watching, I think, Bluey or something, just completely unfazed by the fact that there's paramedics in their house. And I was like, oh, they've seen this before 100 times. And I specifically remember, because she was an older lady, the paramedic he had a hard time getting her stuck. Mm-hmm. And that's the first thing. That's one thing I've noticed. Anytime I have ridden in an ambulance before, and then anytime I've been around it, the first thing you guys do is stick everybody. Fluids are important, I guess.
Yeah, you got to have some.
But kind of going back to, we'll get back to the decision of the hospital and things like that. We'll get to that in a little bit. Since you kind of brought it up about being on an island and kind of you're out there on your own, that's intimidating. Mm-hmm. That can be scary. So has there ever been a time where you or your EMT, you're like, we're in danger?
Oh man. So There's been several times. So I've had a gun pulled on me twice. I have wrestled with a few patients in the past. I've gotten knocked around a couple times. For the most part, typically on scenes, we outnumber whoever's there so badly because, especially if it's a rowdy scene. I mean, you've got at least 2 EMS personnel, sometimes more. You've got at least 4 firefighters if they've sent 1 fire engine that only has 4 guys. Some of them have 5 or 6. And then you have however many cops have showed up. And it's usually not just 1. It's usually more. So out of a 12-year career, I'd say I've managed to keep my nose clean pretty well. But there was a time. Are we ready for EMS story time? Can we
let's go ahead and get into that.
EMS story time. So I had this legendary partner. Her name's Danielle Houston. Shout out Danielle. Love her to death. She is an assertive, confident, amazing paramedic. And she has a big personality. Like when she walks in the room, you know she's there. She is amazing. But this was when I was pretty new in EMS. She was much more aggressive than she is now. She was just an aggressive personality. And sometimes Danielle would just do things and be like, God, Danielle, please don't get me in trouble. Please don't get me in a fight. We're driving to the hospital in the middle of the night one night from way out in the county somewhere with a guy that was under arrest for DUI. And I say under arrest because the cops had arrested him, but they hadn't actually cuffed him or done anything. They just told us, take him to the hospital. We'll come up there. We're going to arrest him. Okay. And we get about halfway to the hospital. Now, the cops were supposed to follow right behind us. And we get about 2-3 miles down the road, and it's night, and, visibility is not great, but headlights show up really, really well. And all of a sudden, I look out the back window, and it's real dark back there. I was like, oh, crap, where'd the SO go? Where's the sheriff at? And so I'm hoping the guy's not going to notice. And he starts looking out the back window. I go, oh, great, because this guy was huge. He was he wasn't much taller than us, but he was about 2 of me wide. Just a big, buff dude. I'm like, crap. And the man looks at me and very calmly, very quietly says, I'm getting out now. And I said, okay, sir, would you like me to stop the ambulance first? I'm going to let this guy out. Well, the guy had made suicidal statements, and I think, if I remember correctly, the wreck was actually a suicide attempt. He was trying to drive off of a bridge. So we're really not supposed to let him back out of the ambulance, right? But again, it's just us. It's just me. And I yelled up to Danielle. I'm like, Danielle, this guy's trying to get out. And she goes, oh, he's not getting out. She puts the ambulance in park. I'm like, uh-oh. So he gets up. I'm out of his way. He's getting up. He opens the back door. And when he opens the back door, Danielle's standing on. Danielle's not small. She's a CrossFit nut. She is ripped for, she probably whooped my ass 2 or 3 times. And this guy starts trying to get out. Danielle grabs a hold of him and starts wrestling with him. And I'm just standing there in the back of the ambulance, my little 5'9", 160-pound self, just watching this go. I'm like, I can't let my female partner show me up and wrestle this guy in the middle of the street in the middle of the night. So I just took from my WWE watching days and just jumped on this guy's back. My feet didn't hit the ground. I jumped straight out of the ambulance right onto his back, and we start wrestling this guy in the middle of the road. And we're calling for help. And nothing, no one's coming. Sheriff's office, anybody. This was in the intersection, for those of you in Murfreesboro. This was at 2 o'clock in the morning at the intersection of Medical Center and Fortress, that big, huge, wide intersection right there. And the first people that got to us was an ambulance from the hospital. That's how long we wrestled that guy in the middle of the road. Luckily, he was drunk enough, and, he didn't want to hurt us. He just wanted to get away. He probably could have if he wanted to, but that was a fun memory.
Well, that's nice of him.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So back to, that's our fun story time. So kind of back to what goes into playing into those decisions of like, okay, we need to take this guy to St. Thomas, or now I forget the name of the hospital in Smyrna, Stonecrest.
Stonecrest, yeah.
Or hey, maybe there's not a helicopter available. We need to beat feet up to Vanderbilt or Centennial or whatever, some of those bigger hospitals.
So that just comes with understanding the services available at the hospitals, and it's not always an easy decision. I just had one the other day. I had a girl where I had a suspicion of a closed head injury. So she'd been hitting the head hard enough, and she was confused enough that I was concerned there was possibly a head bleed element where she had a ruptured vessel in her head and was bleeding internally. And I just had to sit there for a second and think, is this someone I needed to call a helicopter for and fly this up to Nashville? Because they can't repair this at St. Thomas Rutherford. If that's what this is, the only treatment for her is a hospital with a, on-call neurosurgeon. And so it's just decisions like that where you have to know what's available where. And sometimes those things change day to day and time to time. We get a email in the mornings telling us what the local hospitals have available. And then most of the Nashville hospitals, it's a little bit more consistent. Vanderbilt has pretty much everything on call all the time or on premises all the time. So you always know if you go up there, you've got pretty much everything. And I think Skyline is a close second. Skyline has, I think they're a level 2 trauma center. I might be wrong on that. It could be level 1 trauma. But they are, really good hospital. Those are kind of the two catch-alls. One's a TriStar, one's Vanderbilt. St. Thomas West has pretty much everything except trauma. They have all the cardiovascular, all the neuro. If you've ever been to that hospital, there's a hallway in that hospital so long you almost can't see the end. It's like a quarter mile long. It's huge, but they have tons of stuff.
What is the difference there between a trauma 1, trauma 2?
I couldn't really.
I'm well aware of what T3 is at Stones River.
Right. I couldn't tell you specifically. From my understanding, it's the services you have available, like on call. So it's basically your ability to say whatever you guys bring to us in an emergency situation, we can take care of. Essentially, level 1 is like they've got everything. If you need a hand surgeon, we've got one of those. If you need an eye surgeon, if you need OB, if you need whatever, we've got it. So
awesome. Well, we're kind of wrapping things up a little bit. I got a couple more questions I do want to get through. So first thing, we talked about kind of your relationship with other first responders and how you guys interact here in Rutherford County. How do you guys interact with your dispatchers? And then on the complete backside, when you get to the hospital, we'll start with the dispatchers and kind of how that works with you guys on the front end, because we kind of missed that. But then let's get to the stuff on the back end. You're finishing the call up. You're pulling into the hospital. What happens from there?
Yeah. So dispatchers, I think a lot of EMS and fire and police people have really weird relationships with dispatchers. Most of them seem to dislike them. And I've had my moments in my career where I was very upset with dispatch, but you have to understand what dispatch is dealing with. They're working in a room that looks like the frickin' Starship Enterprise. They've got 86 screens sitting in front of them, all this data streaming. They're talking to someone on the phone. They're talking to us on the radio, and they're communicating with the people alongside them in the room that are trying to help them. So it is a crazy complicated task that I want no part of, and I'm really grateful that we have a good dispatch system here. And so my relationship with them is good. Back in the day, I felt like there was a little bit more conflict between us and our dispatch in particular. You kind of felt like if you pissed dispatch off at 8 o'clock in the morning, you're probably going to be up all night because they were going to give you all the calls. But it's not like that now. They don't actually pick who gets the call. We have an automated system that pings the closest unit based on their location. So I think they do a really good job around here. I'm sure other services have great dispatch. I'm sure some have poor ones, but my relationship with them has always been really good, especially since I started taking them donuts every once in a while. I'll go over to dispatch and take them some donuts. But as far as our relationship and what happens when you go to the hospital, so en route to the hospital, you call in your report. You try to give them as much heads up as you can, and it's just a basic, here's the chief complaint, age, am I coming in emergency or non? Because that tells them more than pretty much anything is how you're coming, especially if you're going to a hospital that knows you. If they hear me on the radio saying, hey, I'm coming in emergency, that should mean more than if I'm going to Vanderbilt emergency. They don't know me at all. I'm just some dude coming in. But, I've worked with most of the nurses at St. Thomas Rutherford since they've been there. There are very few nurses at St. Thomas Rutherford ER that have been there longer than I've been at Rutherford County EMS. So they all know me pretty well. And I think for the most part, I mean, I'm a pretty easygoing guy. I'm not high strung. I get along with pretty much everybody. There are bumps and bruises along the way. We have disagreements with the hospital staff. But what it looks like is, you give your report, you pull up to the hospital, you get out, you walk in, you go up to the charge desk, and they assign you a room. And you go into the room and you give your report to the nurse, usually. If it's a more serious patient or if they're not quite as busy, the doctor will be there waiting, and be able to give your report to the doctors and the nurses at the same time, which is nice because you don't have to repeat yourself. If we have like a big, I've got someone who's been shot 2 or 3 times and I'm taking them up to Nashville, it's a really cool process. So we're taking our traumas up to Vanderbilt. You walk in. As soon as you walk in, if you're coming in emergency and they've already assigned you a trauma room, you just go straight into the trauma room. You stand there, you help them put the patient on the bed. They have a star of life on the ground. You go stand on your little star and you don't do anything. They do their whole full first assessment, and they, do their whole assessment first, and then they ask for a report. So they've already done their primary assessment. They've already addressed whatever life threats they think are imminent. And then you give your report and you kind of tell them exactly what happened and add in whatever things you did on their own. So it varies from hospital to hospital, but it's pretty standard across different hospitals in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would imagine, especially, a bigger hospital like Vanderbilt or St. Thomas West or places like that you would want to have a pretty standard idea of what everybody's to expect.
Yeah, everything's pretty the same. Those big trauma calls are a little bit different, but for the most part, if I go up to Vanderbilt with a chest pain, it's just, I go into a room, I give a report just like normal. Yeah. It's the same. So
yeah, it's the big stuff though.
Yeah.
They call it the Star of Life up there. Is that what you said?
Just like the background of the EMS emblem, the star that's in the back, they got it's either a mat or it's like a tile that's on the ground. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've been up there, but
hopefully it stays that way.
Yeah, it's just there because where will I stand if they don't have a star there? I don't know where to stand, man.
It's like the COVID tape that everybody put down
basically
at the gas station
everybody stay away from me.
Mm-hmm.
That must be what it is. They just don't want me to get close to them. That's fair.
So kind of in closing, what's something you see in the industry? And I know we've talked about some different cultural aspects of the industry. So what's something you see in your industry that you think is good and you maybe want to see either more of it or you want to see that stay the same? And what's something that you're like, we should probably find a way to fix this? And that could be, obviously, we don't want to talk about Roco specifically, but
yeah,
it's obviously that's where you've worked for the last 12, 15 years plus Williamson County. So, it's not like you would have seen it much else.
Yeah. This is kind of a hard question for me because my experience is so narrow into the 911 side of things, and also, for all their differences, Williamson and Rutherford, the only 2 911 services I've ever worked to serve in the same general area, the same general people. Now, Williamson, in general, those people are a little bit cleaner and they have nicer cars, but, for the most part, it's just people. But I think in EMS in general, education-wise on the front end could be a little bit more robust, and I would love to see paramedicine just become a degree like nursing. And that would do a couple things. It would give us a louder voice because most of the people that run these boards and all these things, they're highly educated and that's what they respect. You don't walk into a board of directors meeting at a hospital without a master's degree, at least usually, unless you're a guest of something like that. Most of these people are doctors or, they're just highly educated people. And unfortunately, EMS in general are not. Most of us, some of us have GEDs and we go and get our EMT licensure right out of high school and just get good at the job itself, but don't necessarily branch out and learn other things. So I think that's something that would be really good to see happen, whether it's something just kind of along the lines like Columbia does, where you can get an associate's degree along with your paramedic license, but just make that a more standard practice to where that's what you do. Like I've got my bachelor's in paramedicine. I would love to be able to see stuff like that.
Okay. Then before we get out of here, I do want to get some more personal stuff from you. So kind of on the, on the family side of things, I know you personally, so just so y'all know, Zach has 4 kids. He's been married for 15 years almost. Long time.
I'm almost afraid to say out loud because I'm afraid I'll say the wrong number. 13 years.
13 years.
I'm fairly certain it's 13 years, Katie.
We'll edit that later if necessary.
I am 100% certain it was 13 years.
It's 2011, right?
Yeah.
May?
Yeah.
13, I was there.
13 years.
So, obviously, you went from that job that you were doing, being a courier to doing this stuff now. So what are some, other than just, simply aging, maturing, becoming more responsible, as most people do over time, what's some effects that, some of the effects of this job that you've brought home with you?
Well, unfortunately, I spent the majority of 2017 through about 2019 in a huge depression. So that was something I brought home that was unpleasant. I definitely have some anxiety attached to the job that comes directly from the job. I can't take my kids anywhere without worrying about, we go on a hike and I worry about my kids falling and hitting their head on a rock, and it's just kind of this ongoing thing in the back of my head. I've kind of learned how to mute. But that's some negative things that I brought home from work that I don't think anyone can help but bring home. But, over the years, you just learn how to deal with it. I went and talked to my doctor. I got on medicines for a few years and dealt with it and talked to some counselors and stuff like that and kind of got it under control to where I could deal with it. And I have a great support system at home. My kids are fantastic. My wife is amazing. And I've got family that I can talk to about these things. Up until, last year, I had Missy Armstrong. She's my wife's aunt. She passed away last year, but she was a medic for years. I would always go talk to her. So that was tough losing her. But that's some of the stuff I brought home. But on the flip side, I feel like I'm a much more confident person. I feel like a whole lot less bothers me now because when you spend most of your days at work watching people pass away from this world in various awful different ways, you develop an appreciation for just being able to go home and sit on the couch and watch TV or spend time with your family. And, we went on a hike the other day to Fiery Gizzard and Mount Eagle with some friends. And, I just can't tell you how nice it was just to not be at work, not be dealing with stuff. And, I just felt a whole lot of gratitude just being able to do a normal person thing in a normal person way and just do something like that. So it has its drawbacks and it's, but it also has the thing, I don't think I would be as tough of a mentally tough person if I didn't do EMS. I don't think I'd be as good at critical thinking. And, EMS teaches you how to triage and classify things and lay out what's more important, what's less important. And I think that kind of spills over naturally into your normal life. So now there's probably some drawbacks to that as well, because my wife might be all worked up about something and I just don't think it's that big a deal and I don't care. And then I end up getting in trouble. So there's, those are some things I think I've brought home.
I get in trouble for the same thing. So
every dude does, man.
It happens.
It does. We're trying.
Are we though?
Well, you and I both did great by marrying very sweet, long-suffering women who don't let us get away with anything, but also don't chop our heads off over small things. So.
That much is true. So in parting, I think we're going to close it down here in just a minute. But kind of in parting, if you could go back to 20-year-old Zach and say, hey, just so you know, here in a couple years, you're going to spend 12, 15, 16 years doing this right here. What's something you would say, hey, this is what you need to do to get yourself ready for this?
Probably invest in Bitcoin, something like that. No,
same here.
No, oh man, that's a good question. What would I tell 20-year-old me? What would I tell myself in order to survive this career? Mm-hmm. And this is something I don't know if you could call this a life skill, but it's something I've always had, is the ability to surround myself with people who support and love me. And that's just something I would encourage to work on. I mean, I have from my first real full-time partner at work, I mentioned earlier, Danielle, She was my partner for my first 2 years in EMS. Just groomed me and supported me so well for this job. You know, I'm married way above my pay grade. I have a wife who is just fantastic. You know, we have parents that prepared us pretty well for the world. For those listening, dad is a colonel and mom is a doctor of some kind of education. I don't even know what it is. It's too smart for me, but they're just, you know, prepared us so well. And then I have a good support system around me. And I think that's what you need really in life anyway, but particularly in a job that stresses you so much and strains you so much. The divorce rate among EMS employees and hospital professionals in general, or medical professional in general, is just so high. And it's not because bad people work in EMS and bad people work in hospitals. It's because people work in those situations, and those situations are kind of terrible some days. And so you come home and you're not exactly your best self, and you do that enough days in a row, and that's enough to break any marriage, or any relationship. And so, yeah, I think that's probably what I would tell myself, is just focus on your friends. Be careful with who you make your friends. Don't surround yourself with negative people. Surround yourself with people who are either in step with you that want the same things, or people ahead of you. And that's something I feel like our generation misses out on, is we don't pick mentors, man. You know, get some people that are a few steps ahead of you and just pick their brains and dig into them and let them pour into you their knowledge and their skills and their wisdom. And that's what I would say.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming in and sitting down with us. I really appreciate it. We're gonna go ahead and close it down.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening to another episode of How It All Works podcast. You can find us on any major podcast network. We're also on YouTube. Smash that follow, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. We'll see you on the next one.